Welcome to the X-lite guardrail end terminal installation video. This video covers the tangent system. If you are installing a flared system, please refer to the installation manual for any differences. The X-lite system is a highly engineered safety device made up of a relatively small number of parts. Before starting installation, ensure that you are familiar with the makeup of the system that is being installed. Prior to installation, ensure that proper manuals and components are on site. With regards to system orientation, this installation video and the installation manual will refer to the head of the system as the approach end of the system. The back of the system will be referenced as the trailing end of the system. Always use the supplied installation manual as a guide through the entire installation process. Step 1. Assembling the components. Some components require assembly, and it is recommended that this step be completed prior to the start of the system assembly. Post 2 assembly. The soil plate should be on the trailing side of post 2. The bolts should be installed from back to front so that the head of the bolt rests on the soil plate. Depending on your post driver equipment, post 2 may need to be partially driven before this step can be accomplished. Slider bracket and panel assembly. Attach the slider bracket to the inside of the approach end of rail 2. Bolts should be installed with the bolt head on the outside and the nuts on the inside. Please note, when properly installed, a portion of the bracket will stick out of the rail. Attach the front slider panel to the outside of the trailing end of rail 1. Bolts should be installed with the bolt head on the inside and the nuts on the outside. The angled portion of the slider panel should extend beyond the end of the rail. Step 2. Post and blockout installation. Always start the installation at the existing W-beam barrier and assemble the system toward the impact head. When driving the posts into stiff or rocky soil, pay close attention not to bend the posts. If rock or stiff soil is encountered, the posts may be installed by augering and backfilling the holes. Extra care must be taken to prevent settlement or lateral displacement of the post. Backfill material should be compacted to optimum compaction. Please note, the X-lite can be installed with an offset of 0 to 24 inches over the length of the system. Begin by running a string line from the existing posts in a tangent position. Install the posts at standard highway post spacing of 75 inches and post height of 28 1/4 inches or 31 3/4 inches depending on guardrail height. Measure and mark the ground line on each post as a site reference during installation. Please note, if you are installing a 50-foot system, the system will have 2 additional posts and an additional section of guardrail. Posts 4 through 6 are standard steel line posts. Posts 1 through 3 are proprietary crimped posts. Post 3 is identified by the post having a crimp and holes on one side of the post only. Post 3 requires up to an additional 2-inch offset back from the string line to allow sufficient space for the slider bracket assembly. Post 2 does not require a blockout. Align the post with the back side of the rail. Position the outside edge of the post 8 inches from the string line. The soil plate should be on the trailing end side of the system. Depending on your post driver equipment, it may be necessary to partially drive post 2 prior to attaching the soil plate. Once the soil plate is installed, continue driving the post to the desired height. Post 1 is a crimped post. Post 1 does not require a blockout. Align the post with the back side of the rail. Position the outside edge of the post 8 inches from the string line. Post 1 is identified by the post having a crimp and slots instead of holes. Install blockouts on posts 3 through 6. Blockouts at posts 3 and 5 must be bolted on before hanging the rails. At post 5, secure the blockout using the approach side hole on the post. The rail does not attach at post 5. At post 3, attach the blockout and back slider panel. Secure the blockout using the approach side hole on the post. Be sure to use the 1-inch washer when attaching the slider panel. The slot on the slider panel should point toward the approach end of the system. Blockouts at posts 4 and 6 are secured when the rail is bolted to the posts. Step 3. Install the ground strut assembly. Install tension rods between posts 1 and 2 by sliding the rods through the openings on the bottom of post 2. Secure the rods at post 1 by passing the rods through the small piece of angle with the angle sitting flush on the ground. The small piece of angle will sit flush on the ground on 28-inch systems only. On 31-inch height systems, the small piece of angle will sit approximately 3 inches off the ground. Tighten the rods so that there are equal amounts of threads exposed at both ends of the rods. Step 4. Hang the rails. Please note, if installing a 50-foot system, the system uses 4 sections of rail instead of 3. If you are attaching to an MGS rail system, a transition guardrail panel is necessary. Before installing rail 3, ensure that the blockout at post 5 has already been bolted on. Attach rail 3 at post 6. Pass the bolt through the approach end hole of the post. Splice rail 3 with the existing rail using the supplied yellow shear bolts. Do not use an air impact wrench to tighten the shear bolts. Ensure that the bolt that secures the rail and blockout at post 7 passes through both sections of guardrail, the blockout, and the post. Please note, rail 3 is not attached to post 5. Before installing rail 2, ensure that the blockout and back slider panel at post 3 have already been bolted on. Attach rail 2 at post 4. Pass the bolt through the approach end hole of the post. Splice rail 2 with rail 3 using the supplied yellow shear bolts. Do not use an air impact wrench to tighten the shear bolts. The rails do not attach to post 5. Attach rail 1 at post 2. Pass the bolt through the trailing end slot in the post. Splice rails 1 and 2 by connecting the slider panel assembly, front and back parts together. Install the bolts from back to front with the nuts on the front side. The arrow cut into the top of the slider panel should point to the approach end of the system. Attach rail 1 to post 1. Pass the bolt through the approach end slot of the post. Be sure to use the square washer for this step. Step 5. Install the impact head. Install the impact head to the approach end of rail 1. Place the impact head on the outside of the rail. Install bolts from outside in with nuts on the inside. Step 6. Install the cable. The cable is attached to the bottom of post 2 and at the slider bracket at post 3. Begin to install the cable by passing the threaded end through the slot at the bottom of post 2. Install the small L-shaped bracket and round washer included with the cable. This bracket and washer are critical components and help keep the cable engaged in the slot. Thread the nut so that 1 inch of the threads are protruding. Pass the other end of the cable through the slider bracket at post 3. Tighten the cable nut at post 2. Apply approximately 60 foot-pounds of torque. It will be necessary to use a pipe wrench or large pliers on the back side of the cable to hold it in place while tightening. If the cable is not held in place, it will spin while you attempt to tighten the cable. When tightening, make sure that the L bracket does not shift, turn, or move out of position. If a torque wrench is not available, tighten the cable nut until a maximum of 1/2 inch of cable deflection is measured at the midpoint when pressure is applied by hand. Step 7. Final Inspection Checklist. Before final inspection, apply a delineation marker to the impact head as required per local, state, or federal standards. Always use the checklist included in the installation manual during your final inspection to ensure a proper installation. Check that post 1 uses slotted holes. Check that the rail is bolted at posts 1, 2, 4, and 6 only. Check that the rails are not bolted to posts 3 and 5. Check that the square washer was used at post 1. Check at post 2 that the rail is bolted using the trailing end slot in the post. Check posts 1, 4, and 6 that the rail is bolted using the approach end hole in the post. Check that rails 3 and 4 are spliced together using the supplied yellow shear bolts. Check that rails 2 and 3 are spliced together using the supplied yellow shear bolts. Check at post 7 that the 9-inch bolt passes through both guardrail sections, the blockout, and the post. Check that the slider assembly is properly assembled with bolts from back to front with nuts on the outside. Check that the angled position of the slider panel points towards the trailing end of the system. Check that the arrow cut into the top of the panel points towards the approach end of the system. Check that the cable bracket and washer are installed on the cable at post 2. Check that approximately 60 foot-pounds of torque have been applied to the cable nut at post 2. Check that there is no blockout on post 1 or post 2.